Hi everyone, thanks for joining me today. My name is Mitzi Stover and I will be your presenter. I'm looking forward to discussing how to design clear, organized, high-quality online assignments. Teacher Created Materials is a family-owned company that began in the garage of a teacher over 40 years ago. Our founder, Rochelle Cracchiolo, envisioned creating a company focused on one vision: to create a world in which children love to learn. All our materials and resources are created by teachers, for teachers and students with this vision in mind. Today we will review a variety of online assignment types and methods for crafting them to meet the expected standards and outcomes. We will look at formative and summative assessments, discussion forums, incorporating student choice and creativity, providing feedback, scaffolding, extension activities, and optional assignments. Our goals for this webinar are to examine how to develop clear, organized, and high-quality assignments, explore elements of assignment directions that support understanding, choice, and creativity, and finally, to review a variety of online assignment types. Let's review what you will need to be prepared for this virtual training. You will need your learning reflection guide and a pen or pencil. Speaking of that learning reflection guide, throughout the webinar, you will occasionally be directed to stop and do something on that guide. Anytime you see this image, you will know that you need to complete a portion of your learning reflection guide. Okay, are you ready? Today we will be talking about creating digital assignments. First, we'll look at expectations, including the standards we are covering in an assignment we're creating. Next, we'll look at how to write clear directions that support student learning and help to prevent the need for extensive clarification. And lastly, we'll look at how to assess student work in general, as well as creating formative and summative assessments. Let's consider the various types of assignments that we may use with our students. They might include writing assignments, quizzes and tests, video creation, discussions, slide decks, audio recordings, or picture uploads. We might also use low-tech submissions, such as drawings and handwritten computation or handwritten assignments. Oftentimes, we may begin with an assignment type, but I propose beginning with the expectations and outcomes and then selecting the assignment type or types that will work best to demonstrate those expectations and outcomes. Also consider low-tech options for younger students and for those who may have spotty bandwidth. The assignment types I'll be talking about today all involve digital submissions, but online submissions are useful not just when we're teaching and learning remotely. They offer some options that are helpful when we teach and learn in hybrid and face-to-face situations as well. What do we expect of students in terms of work and effort? Having a clear idea at the outset of what we expect from students, the outcome or outcomes, should guide how we craft the assignment or assessment. Of course, we will likely consider state standards, but often there are additional goals and expectations we have for students. Begin by thinking about what your expectations are for the assignment or assessment. What specific outcomes or standards are students practicing or being assessed on? Are there additional goals you may have, such as social-emotional learning, tech skills, or collaboration with peers? Thinking about these ahead of time will lead to creating clear directions and assignments and assessments that connect to the expectations. In a sense, we are beginning at the end or using a backward planning model. Once you have determined your expectations for the assignment or assessment, consider how students can best demonstrate their understanding. In some cases, the outcomes may necessitate a particular type of submission, such as writing. If we're working with a writing standard, students will obviously need to write something, but perhaps they can have a choice in terms of the subject they write about. If the standard has to do with understanding concepts such as measurement, they might demonstrate their understanding using a different medium. You might consider incorporating choice and allowing how students demonstrate their understanding. We'll talk a little bit more about student choice later. So let's pause for a moment. Think about an assignment that you have used recently or plan to use soon. What standards or learning targets do you have for that assignment? These might not only be the state standards, but all goals you have for a particular assignment. Once we have identified expectations and standards for an assignment, consider specific expectations with regards to length, such as a sentence, a paragraph, maybe even 4 letters. A time limit, if it is for an audio or video submission, or any formatting requirements, such as indenting paragraphs, writing incomplete sentences, creating a list, including student name, use of a particular font or file type. These elements will also be important to include in clear, effective directions. So let's say I'm going to have my students write a paragraph about something we've read, and working with ELA Standard 3.1 that deals with writing opinion pieces. In order for students to demonstrate that standard, I'm going to have them write an opinion paragraph. But in addition to that, I also want them to practice writing a paragraph that's 4 to 6 sentences, that includes a topic sentence and details from the story. I also want them to practice formatting the page in the way that we have practiced. As a result, I'll keep those additional details in my mind as I move forward in writing my directions. Let's pause again. Think about an assignment that you have used recently or plan to use soon. What additional or embedded expectations do you have for students on this assignment? Now that you have considered your expectations for an assignment, it's time to begin writing the actual directions. Think of the directions as the GPS for your students. How will your directions guide students to arrive where you want them to be? Turn-by-turn instructions will keep them on the road to the destination. By using backward planning, we start with the outcomes and expectations for the assignment. This will guide how we write our directions. Planning ahead in this way helps support student learning and also slows the tide of questions seeking clarification that we may receive from students and parents. Clear directions should include details about the task itself, of course. For example, if students are asked to write an opinion paragraph, that writing is the task. Then directions should also include specific parameters and guidelines. For example, this might pertain to length, formatting, or other details. Including the due date in the directions helps with student clarity even when the assignment due date has been adjusted in the settings. While this may seem redundant, it can really help support student understanding of when assignments are due. Lastly, including the grading criteria is also helpful to reinforce what is expected of students. Providing the grading criteria along with directions helps students to literally see on the page how their performance will affect their grade and where the most important elements of the assignment lie. This also helps if parents are assisting with student learning. They can see clearly what the expectations and grading criteria are. Focusing on clear assignment directions helps students and parents understand how to proceed with the task, even if we have reviewed the task during live instruction. It is important to strike a balance between not giving enough detail and overwhelming students with too many words and details. When creating assignments, using a predictable format is your friend. For instance, predictable headings such as overview, directions, materials, due date, grading policy are helpful. Be as clear and specific, without being too wordy, as possible. In our traditional classes, we typically give students a hard copy of instructions or directions and then go over them in more detail verbally. And while we may do the same thing in our live sessions while working remotely, it is even more crucial to develop directions that are clear and understandable. You might consider using a template so that the look of the directions is consistent from assignment to assignment. Consistent, predictable language use also supports students and parents. For instance, I would like to include the same headings: overview, learning goals, directions, steps, and how to submit the work on each assignment. Of course, these headings could be adjusted in an age-appropriate way. The idea is to use the same headings from assignment to assignment in the interest of consistency. So, in the example here, my students know that the overview will provide them with some context about the assignment that they're going to be completing. The learning goals is just a student-friendly way of identifying the objectives that I have for that assignment. Directions include the task itself. The steps also include additional guidelines or parameters that I want to include for my students. Using the same icons on assignments functions as a visual cue for each item. This can help students and parents understand exactly what that piece is asking from them. So I might use an icon of a book to indicate something that they need to read or reference to something we have read. I might use a mathematical icon to indicate some kind of math computation assignment, or even a paintbrush to indicate an artistic or creative component. Many teachers begin assignments with an overview. This helps to introduce or reinforce themes or topics. It can provide context and connect to previous content, themes, topics, or assignments. Overview blurbs are also helpful to generate student interest and excitement about an assignment. Let's look at an example. Overview. This week we read the story Cat Wings. We talked about how sometimes we rely on ourselves and other times we ask for help from others. Now it is your turn to write your opinion. Now let's move on to writing the directions. Of course, it's critical to be specific in explaining the task that students are being asked to complete. In addition to the directions for completing the actual task, it is also helpful to include specific directions about the length, time limit, frequency of practice, or formatting details if applicable. Include the due dates, even when they have been adjusted in the settings. This redundancy helps provide student clarity. For example, if I'm asking my students to write that opinion paragraph I mentioned earlier, I may have relatively short directions about the task itself. Then I would add additional instructions about how to format it and the due date. I will also include links to additional resources that students may want or need to refer to about these specific guidelines. In this case, I would have already had students complete assignments using this specific format, and I would hope that they'd remember how to format their page appropriately, but I'm also going to include a link to either written directions with screenshots showing how to format, or maybe a screencast video demonstrating how to format the page, or possibly both. Even if these resources are located elsewhere in my digital course, including the hyperlinks in the directions themselves helps support students as they do not have to go searching for these resources, minimizing the number of clicks students need to take in order to find the information they need, helps their learning, and helps keep them on task. In addition, I include information about how to actually submit their work. Even though students may have already submitted assignments on the learning management system, such as Google Classroom, it doesn't hurt to also include those steps again. I could also use a link to written directions with screenshots or a screencast again. So if the directions are pretty simple and brief for how to submit, I may just include them at the bottom of every assignment. If the directions are more complicated, I may just include a hyperlink to a directions page so that students can click on that and view the directions for how to submit if they need a refresher. If there are additional resources or tools students will need to utilize in order to complete an assignment, use hyperlinks to embed those. For instance, if students will submit a screenshot for an assignment and they have submitted screenshots previously, you may not need to write out all the instructions for submitting a screenshot again, but do provide a link to instructions in case students need a refresher or to reference them. Also, include hyperlinks to learning resources, like images that are part of the directions or readings. Yes, they may be a part of your classroom already in digital format, but again, linking those learning resources in the assignment itself reduces the number of clicks a student needs in order to have what they need to complete the assignment. It keeps them on track, and it also saves you time because students won't be messaging you asking where to find that story or where to find that image. In our digital classes, it is critical to include specific directions about how to use the tech tools students are expected to utilize for completing their assignments. In fact, it is usually best to have students complete smaller assignments ahead of time in which they are asked to use these tools for practice before being expected to submit larger assignments which require them to use specific tools, programs, or apps. Some of these skills may include uploading a file or even saving a file in a specific file type, how to create screenshots and save them, taking a picture of handwritten work, drawings, or projects, using scanning apps like Cam Scanner to take clear pictures of handwritten work and drawings, how to create a slide deck and add images to that slide deck, recording an audio file, and using other apps like Flipgrid or Padlet. The instructions for using these tools might be included in the directions page for the assignment or linked to another document or screencast or possibly both. Including additional parent directions or a link to a parent page within assignment directions can be really helpful for parents in supporting their children. These additional directions may include additional resources, suggestions for handling areas that you anticipate being the most challenging for students, and suggestions for adapting assignments or where to place energies if students or parents struggle. For instance, let's say that you have a narrative writing assignment in which students are asked to write a paragraph telling a story based on a topic from a list. If the primary goal is to get students writing an organized paragraph with a topic sentence, then you might include directions on the parent page that if a student is really struggling to answer one of the questions or writing prompts, that the parent can have the child write about something else, because the primary goal is to write an organized paragraph. This allows a parent to focus their energy as they assist their child on the most important task rather than on a topic that maybe is not so important. So these parent pages can be an invaluable resource in order to assist parents in assisting their child and ensuring further student success. It is also important to state the due date in the directions. This should include not just the date, but also the time. We're teaching in a different environment now, and where students used to turn work in during class, students are now often submitting work online from home. So including that time of day when assignments are due is pretty critical. It's helpful to keep the time of day when assignments are due consistent. So if you make assignments due at 5 p.m., try to always, or almost always, have them due at 5 p.m. It's also really helpful to include the grading criteria in the directions themselves. This helps with student clarity so that students are very clear on what is expected of them and how they must perform on an individual assignment. This also shows how the work will be assessed and provides clarity for parents who may be looking at how students perform on assignments. Many learning management systems, including Google Classroom, now have a rubric feature. In this example, a rubric is even used for a very small 2-point assignment. Here, students are asked to update their profile on the system. They're required to update the picture, add a line to the bio section, and include a screenshot of the result to submit. The goal here was not just to put a face to the name, even if it is a Bitmoji face, but also to practice taking a screenshot. This is a skill that students are going to be asked to use later in the course on other assignments. Finally, when possible, include examples of finished products. This visual representation of what is expected is especially helpful for digital assignments and submissions, especially when we're working remotely. Typically, we would show these examples in our live sessions during face-to-face classes, but in this case, including a digital representation of what is expected helps students understand what the final product will look like. Next, let's move on to assessment. In general, there are 2 types of assessments we typically use with our students, formative and summative. We'll go over both here. As I mentioned earlier, it is important to have a clear idea of what is being assessed and to determine how students will demonstrate those standards or learning targets. We all know that formative assessments serve a couple of purposes. First, they help students identify their strengths and weaknesses and target areas that need additional work. Formative assessments also help teachers recognize where students are struggling and allow us to intervene immediately. Formative assessments are typically low stakes, meaning they are worth few or even 0 points toward the overall grade. Some examples of formative assessment include asking students to draw a concept map in a class to represent student understanding of a topic, or maybe submit 1 or 2 sentences identifying the main point of a lesson or a story, etc. Or they may explain what they have done, read, or created. Additional examples of online formative assessments may be practice quizzes. These could be simple terms, concepts, or skills that students can review by using the quiz feature in Google Classroom. Project plans in the form of written ideas, drawings, or even in conversation can give both the student and teacher important information about where the student is confident and where they might be struggling. Discussion forums are a great way to check for understanding, and we'll talk a little bit more about discussion forums later. Rough drafts of any writing assignment, practice exercises, and self-evaluations are also formative assessments that can be completed and submitted online. Teachers can ask questions and have students respond with hand signals or in the chat during live instruction. And of course, exit tickets can be used at the end of live instruction to check for understanding. While we use information from quick checks or formative assessments to guide instruction, it is also helpful to give students feedback on these too. This can be done with automatic feedback using the learning management system, such as Google Classroom. The quiz feature can be used as a learning tool in this way. For instance, students completing a quick check using a quiz in Google Forms in Classroom can get details about why a response is incorrect or correct by adding feedback in the questions themselves. This way, it is a learning tool that requires much less time from us giving individual feedback. Yes, it takes time on the front end, but it saves time on the back end. Also, disseminating the information to a group is another way to give feedback on the performance of the group as a whole. This might be done in live sessions, or it could be done as a written debrief, feedback, or as reminders when we notice that students are struggling in certain areas. Lastly, we can provide feedback to the class through video format or screencasts for them to view on their own time. Using the technology to your advantage is a great way to give students feedback on their formative assessment. So I mentioned using auto feedback in Google Quizzes. Keep in mind that quizzes don't have to be quizzes. Many teachers use the quiz feature in the learning management system for practice quizzes and review and as learning tools. So in a multiple choice question, the teacher can set feedback for incorrect answers indicating why those answers are incorrect, and then correct answers also indicating why the incorrect answers were incorrect. In this way, students can complete the quiz, which may not actually be a quiz, on their own and then go back and review the feedback that they get immediately to determine where their gaps in understanding are and also to provide deeper understanding on specific topics. That feedback must be input when creating the quiz itself, which takes a little bit of time, but again, it's a lot more efficient than giving individual feedback to every student on every submission. Student presentations during live instruction is another interesting way to have them complete formative assessments. It not only provides them with an opportunity to practice speaking and listening, but it also can be an effective formative assessment. Students can demonstrate their understanding and learning on particular subjects. And this is also a way to have students practice social emotional learning responses. Students may be asked to give positive feedback to each other in a chat, or maybe they'll keep running notes that they will later submit to the teacher. This allows each student to have a set time where they can present to the class. Another advantage to using student presentations as formative assessment is it allows for efficient grading for the teacher. Students present and the student can evaluate the work immediately in real time as opposed to after live class sessions. Teachers can also provide immediate feedback to students there in the moment. I do recommend having a contingency plan, however, for students who may not have a solid internet connection, may have poor bandwidth. So an option could be to have students create just an audio recording in which they give their presentation. This is a great way to use Google Voice. They can call your Google Voice number and just record their presentation as a voicemail message. And that way they don't need access to a lot of technology or a strong internet connection with video available. Before we move on to summative assessments, let's talk about how formative assessments help with scaffolding. One of the key functions of formative assessments is in giving students the opportunity to practice skills they will need to demonstrate on subsequent summative assessments. So consider how the small formative assessments are connected and lead to the summative ones. Again, this is where backward planning comes into play. We'll need to consider which standards we're expecting students to meet and look at the additional embedded skills students will need to be successful on that summative assessment. And finally, we'll identify methods for supporting the practice of those skills. If I know my students are going to present a project of some kind at the end of a unit or term, planning what that project will be should also help guide the formative assessments and assignments students will complete leading up to it. So let's say that my students are going to research an animal and the environment in which it lives for a summative assessment. I'm planning to have students present their findings in a slide deck that they are either going to present during a live session or record a narration using a screencast as they move through their slide deck. So in order to provide support or scaffolding, I'll need to consider the following. First, I'm going to start with the standards that I'm expecting students to demonstrate proficiency in. I'm looking at ELA Literacy Standard 5.7, dealing with drawing information from multiple sources, ELA Literacy Standard 5.2, writing informative or explanatory texts, ELA literacy standard dealing with production and distribution of writing, and ELA literacy standard dealing with presentation and knowledge of ideas. In addition to the specific reading and writing skills students will need to produce the final product, there are other skills they will also need. These might include vocabulary that they are likely to encounter as they read about their animal and the environment. This could be how to organize information for a specific audience, like their classmates. How to create a slide deck, including how to format slides by looking at the image to text ratio, and also how to insert images into that slide deck. They're also going to need to practice speaking clearly to an audience, and possibly how to record screencasts. Lastly, if I'm going to have students create a screencast and I want the rest of the class to be able to view them, I may want to have them post their screencast into a discussion forum, and that would require also practicing not only how to post to a discussion forum, but also how to post a slide deck to a discussion forum. Continuing with the example of a summative assessment in which students will create a slide deck about an animal and the environment in which it lives, I may use the following as formative assessments along the way. Vocabulary practice quiz on that vocabulary that they're likely to encounter as they conduct their research. A 30-second presentation of an idea for an audience where they practice organization and speaking clearly. The subject matter may not be related to their summative assessment, but just an opportunity to practice presenting for the class and being understandable in terms of organization and articulation. I may have students create 3 slides with images and text as practice creating slide decks, adding images, finding those images, and including text. This could be something very simple. I might ask students to create a 3-slide slide deck, including a person that they really like, a place that they really like, and a food that they really like. This way, I can see if they have the skill set they need in order to complete a professional slide deck for their summative assessment. I may have students create a very brief 30-second screencast just to practice doing it and uploading it. Lastly, I may take that slide deck that they created earlier and use that as the screencast, and then also have them practice posting those slide decks to a discussion forum. These very small pieces along the way enable students to practice the skills they need and enable me to see where they may be struggling so that I can then go back and reteach and further support students in their progress. Consider using various media as scaffolding techniques. For example, written text, images of final products or steps along the way, screenshots of how to complete the process, and video tutorials or screencasts of your own showing how to move through the process. So again, giving directions in various formats really helps to support students. For many students, they're accustomed to reading written text. But for younger students and for many other older students, seeing actual images or watching a video or screencast of how to complete a process really communicates better with them. So giving students the option to read directions or view videos or both helps to support them in their progress toward demonstrating proficiency of the standards. In addition to formative assessment, we also use summative assessments to evaluate student learning at the end of instructional units. Or we might be assessing specific standards or using benchmarks. And as we know, these summative assessments are often high stakes. So let's review some key points. Build on formative assessment skills. Assess the standards intended. In other words, Is the summative assessment actually assessing the standards that we're hoping to assess? Consider, how are students demonstrating their understanding? In our directions for our summative assessments include the actual task directions, embedded expectations, submission directions, additional resources, the grading criteria, the due date, and a parent page if you're going to use that. Some examples of summative assessments may be final projects, unit tests, essays, portfolios, videos, podcasts, presentations, or even infographics. Including rubrics in the directions are also helpful for students and parents. Remember too, this helps parents understand what is expected of students, so they are less likely to ask for clarification or question a score that a student receives on an assignment. While you may not choose to use rubrics for every single assignment, they are especially critical for summative or high-stakes assignments. Taking this extra step when creating the assignment also saves time later, preventing questions of clarification and in making the grading process more efficient. By including the rubric, it forces us to look piece by piece at the assignment we're creating and the various areas that we want to see students demonstrating proficiency. It helps us all be on the same page. Giving feedback on formative, but more importantly, summative assessments can be a daunting task. One of the ways to make the process a little bit more efficient is to use a comment bank. This can help us move through assignment grading a little bit more quickly and efficiently. If you're using Google Classroom, this feature is built in. You can add comments you would like to reuse as soon as you type it in the first time. For those of you who may not be using Google Classroom, you can keep a list of common comments just on a regular document, and then just copy and paste them into the comment section of assignments. That way you have a running list of positive comments, a running list of comments that may indicate areas for improvement or revision, and you can merely copy and paste them, and instead of having to type them fresh each time. This also keeps the comments consistent and the language consistent in the feedback that you're providing. Keeping a running list of links and resources that can help students is also a time saver. This might include links to documents and handouts you've created, images of previous projects, screenshots, videos, online resources, and links. Again, these can be compiled on a single document to be copied and pasted into student feedback. For example, in the visual here, you can see there are some links to resources on writing and grammar, formatting, and slide decks. So if I notice that a student has errors with something like topic sentences, maybe that's something they're struggling with, I may include in the feedback a detail about including a topic sentence and then also a resource that students can click on. Again, this may have been a resource I already included in my digital course, but linking it directly into the feedback of an assignment is a way that makes it easy for the student to review that information. Another way to give feedback quickly is by using voice feedback. It is faster than typing for you, and students, especially younger ones, really love to hear their teachers' voices. The Kaizen add-on allows you to give voice feedback within Google Classroom. So all you have to do is click on the button and just start talking to your student to give them feedback. How cool is that? So let's think about feedback types. What types of feedback do you currently use? What additional types of feedback might you want to try that maybe you haven't used in the past or you haven't used in a while? Now it's time to get into some specific assignments. Here we'll consider how to incorporate student choice, optional assignments, and various ways to use discussion boards. There are several ways to incorporate student choice into your assignments. You might choose a choice board, in which there are many assignments related to a specific theme or unit. Students can choose the order in which they complete the assignments. While they will still likely be expected to complete them all, they have some say over which items they complete first and which they save for later. Another method for allowing for student choice is to use a learning menu. In this model, students choose one task from each area to complete. They choose one appetizer, one main course, and one dessert. A quite simple way to include student choice is to allow for submissions of various media. Students may be permitted to explore different topics to research or present or write about. They might be able to submit their findings using slide decks, audio recordings, videos, screencasts, or by completing low-tech projects or drawings. Of course, the objectives should be the same for each type of submission, but student choice supports student learning and engagement, and in our digital classrooms, we have a wide range of options. So let's pause for a minute and consider student choice. In what ways could you incorporate student choice into an assignment you currently use or plan to use? Optional assignments can be used to give students extra challenges, especially for those who move through assignments quickly or who might seek a little more rigor. They can provide students with the opportunity to take a deeper dive into subjects they have an interest in, or they can be used for grade replacement or extra credit. Now let's talk about discussion forums. Discussion forums can be used in a wide variety of ways for a wide variety of purposes. These include checks for understanding, student curation of resources, presentation of summative assessments, group collaboration, and peer-to-peer interaction. So let's talk about discussions as checks for understanding. A simple discussion forum question might be something like, what was the most interesting part about a lesson, a subject, a story, a concept? Or maybe, what was most confusing about that story, that concept, that lesson? And finally, what questions do you have about the story, the concept, the lesson? Discussions can also be a rich source of student curation of resources. For example, you might ask your students to post an image of something specific. It could be something that they really like or something related to a theme or topic you are discussing in class. Perhaps they can post an image that shows something specific. For older students, you could ask them to post an image that shows persuasion, for example. You might ask students to post an article about a particular subject or a video about something specific. In this way, students are curating the resources. They can then refer to the discussion forum to gather information, to look at different aspects of an issue, find different resources that they're going to incorporate into later assignments. They're doing the hard work and sharing it with the class in a way that's easy to navigate and easy to find what's there. Another way to use discussions is as a tool for presentation of summative assessments. For example, students may post their final writings or even a digital portfolio. They may post slide decks that they've created as part of a project, or post their videos if they've created videos or screencasts. And lastly, they can post drawings or pictures of final projects that may have been created in an analog way with crafts at home. Discussions also provide an opportunity for group collaboration and peer-to-peer interaction. Students can collaborate as a whole class in a discussion forum on large projects, themes, and ideas, or they could participate in smaller discussion forums for group collaboration on specific projects. So they may be split into group discussion forums of maybe only 4 students, and that's where they work out and discuss and create their final project. In this way, they have an area to collaborate where you as the teacher can monitor and see how they're doing in their progress. Discussion forums also provide an opportunity for peer review. Students can post a piece of their writing or a piece of their project, maybe not even the final project, just to get feedback from their peers. In that way, they're receiving feedback, and also their peers get to see what other people are working on and how different students approach the same assignment. This can be a rich opportunity for students to give encouragement and suggestions to each other. Discussion forums also provide a way to have a forum for social and emotional support. When students support each other, they have a sense of belonging, and students like to help each other out. Lastly, discussions can also serve as a way to scaffold learning. One of my favorite topics to use with students is to ask them what successes they're having and what struggles they're having on a particular assignment. This is a great team building activity because students get to see that others are struggling with things as well. And it also gives students an opportunity, again, to help each other out and give suggestions so that everybody can have that collaborative success. Discussions can also be used as extension activities. Students can give additional content. Perhaps if they're asked to post an image, they can get extra points if they post 2 images. Discussion forums can be used as a way to extend the learning for those students who want more challenges or want to discuss a topic in more detail. There can be a separate discussion forum set up for those students who wish to dig deeper on a subject. So let's think about discussion forums. How might you use discussion forums with your students? Or if you're already using discussion forums, is there a new way that you might be able to use them with your class? So let's review. Today we've talked about having expectations at the outset when creating our assignments. Connection to learning targets or standards is a good place to start. Then moving on to considering what embedded expectations do we have for an assignment, such as formatting, length, submission style, and then including those as we think about our directions. And finally, looking at the connection between the expectations we have and the task that students are asked to complete. This brings us to writing our directions. As we write our directions, we considered how to write the directions for the task itself, of course, as well as submission directions. How will students turn this assignment in? We reviewed tech skills that may be needed in order for students to complete an assignment successfully, and the need for including the due date in the assignment directions, as well as adjusting it in the assessment or assignment itself. We reviewed grading criteria and rubrics, and how including that grading criteria or the rubric can help support student learning. It provides a sense of clarity for students and for parents who may be helping about exactly what it is students need to do and show in their assignment in order to achieve success on that particular assignment or assessment. Including the grading criteria also leads to efficient grading on our end. And lastly, we reviewed parent pages. Embedding a parent page into student directions provides additional support for parents who may be helping their students remotely or even when we are back in our classrooms. Those parent pages may include additional resources or additional directions so that parents can see how to best help their child be successful on a particular assignment. So today, we examined how to develop clear, organized, and high-quality assignments. We explored elements of assignment directions that support understanding, choice, and creativity. We reviewed a variety of online assignment types. Thank you so much for viewing this webinar. I hope that you were able to take away some nugget that you can implement into your class. My name is Mitzi Stover. If you'd like to learn more about teacher-created materials, check out the free professional learning options at the link shown on the screen. Remember, we want to support you no matter where you are teaching today and in the future. As a company founded and run by teachers, we know your time is valuable. We appreciate you spending some of that time with us and hope this training will help you to be successful and, of course, to help you create a world in which your students love to learn. Thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful school year.